Well, thank you, Andrew, for the introduction. Just on behalf of Minnesota Power and all of our employees and staff, I'm just very happy to be with you today and answer any additional questions, and with my partners in co-op world and muni world. So very happy to be here.
Thank you. I guess I would like to share that I don't need to take notes when we go back to the small table this time. I'm up here.
Just happy to be here and ready to answer questions. Thank you.
All right, excellent. First we'll start off with kind of the guiding principle that we're thinking about today. What are some of the top challenges for your utility? And whoever wants to start can start.
I think one of the major challenges for us is that we're currently in a no-growth environment, and we invested in a lot of infrastructure early on in the 40s and 50s. So we're trying to replace all that old infrastructure, but we have no growth to pay for that. So it's how do you do that without having too much rate pressure? Also, nobody wants that replaced infrastructure in their backyard. So now navigating the permitting, the environmental requirements, the easement requirements is a lot different today than it was when we first put facilities in place. That's a challenge. Maintaining fairness across all rate classes, making sure that everybody pays their fair share. That's another part, especially as we integrate distributed energy resources. So you want to make sure that there's no winners and losers as that happens, that everybody pays their fair share. I do think that cooperatives are uniquely poised to take on some of these challenges because we are member-owned. We're a not-for-profit, so members are a direct part of our governance. They choose our board of directors. They're encouraged to participate in our policies and procedures, our annual meetings. We have focus group meetings, so there's a lot of opportunity for member involvement and members to have a say in how this goes. And I think because of that spirit, we'll be able to navigate the challenges that we have facing us today.
All right, thank you, Derek. As a investor-owned regulated utility in St. Paul, Minnesota, Power is kind of upheld to a pretty rigorous standard by our regulators in St. Paul when we make any decision. And it's a process, focused process, I should say. And as we make big decisions, we are required and we value the opportunity to work with all of our major stakeholders in making those big decisions. So whether it's about sizing the fleet or different types of programs we have for renewable energy, things take time. And I wish they could be quicker sometimes because you could have a really good idea, but the goal here is stability. As we really revolutionize our energy landscape across this country over the next 30 or 40 years, it is important that we take all stakeholders' views into account and balance off environmental policy with costs, with reliability and safety. All those things are really important. And as part of a regulatory process in St. Paul, it's very transparent and very open. And we are required to kind of do that, and we value that. We wake up in the morning trying to not be focused just on tasks, but also by living up to our values, and that means taking part in the process and environmental stewardship. So that's it. But it takes time. So our best new energy policies have taken 2 to 3 years in the commission. I think even just changing our electric vehicle rate could take up to 8 months in front of the Public Utility Commission. So, Julie?
Thank you both. So for Grand Rapids Public Utilities here, we're quite small. We're a public power agency, municipally governed. And so about 7,200 electric customers. And so not the breadth of customer base to be able to explore some of these new technologies that we've been talking about today. It's really hard. Even the redundancy and the reliability efforts. Again, small number of customers means not and affordable rates means not an abundance of extra ability to invest in that. So a lot of the things that we're looking at is how do we capture some of the new technologies, whether it's automated metering infrastructure that makes us more effective and efficient and helps us educate our customers, to underground versus overhead for reliability and different things like that, and redundancy and still maintain those affordable rates. And so one of our biggest challenges, I think, is being small. One of the benefits with that is being densely populated compared to, say, a cooperative or an IOU, but with that means a small number of customers too, to spread that cost.
All right, thank you. So we're going to the next question, which probably touches on some similar themes. What are some of the challenges related particularly to energy delivery or supplying energy to consumers? And whoever wants to
Want
start.
just to go back
Sure.
the other way? All right, we can do that. So Grand Rapids Public Utilities is distribution only. We do not have generation, so a little bit different. We we obtain via a wholesale contract our energy supply from Minnesota Power. And so a lot of our resource mix is going to come from what we get from them. We are now exploring here just in the last 2 years some community solar options. And we talked even here this morning about local economy and local investment and trying to be diverse with that. And so those decisions that go into it obviously are financial. We've explored the biomass a little bit and how do we take advantage of what we have locally here that may be slightly more expensive and compare that to what we can get via a contract. And so when we look at that resource mix, it's really the finances that go into it, make sure that we can maintain that reliability and affordability for our current customers, but also take advantage of the sustainability that we know is, we talked about carbon constrained and those things that we know are coming down the pipe in the future.
Thank you, Julie. Can we ask for audience questions yet, or is that your job?
Well, we're going to save it to the end.
Okay, all right, all right. I just.
That's all right with everybody?
Okay, all right. Well, part of the challenges for energy delivery for Minnesota Power is just how decisions are made, but that as we evolve our whole energy portfolio around the country, is still keeping those tried and true values of safety, reliability, and affordability. And I hear you've talked a lot about those all day. So even though we're going on to new technology and new resource types, we have to keep all those tried and true values and be responsible to our people below. At Minnesota Power, we are 31% renewable sourced as of the end of last year, and by 2025, our portfolio mix will show us at 44% renewable. And that's what Julie's buying when she buys power from Minnesota Power on your behalf as residents of the city. That evolving fleet is a challenge. And how do we do that? How do we balance the right staffing levels? The traditional forms of electric generation have required a lot more labor. We have to be cognizant of that. And so as we evolve, we also need to kind of stay grounded and based in our heritage and who we are, and be good to our people.
Thanks, Luke. I guess I'll just, it sounds like you had a chance to hear from somebody from Great River Energy, our power provider. They're currently at the 25% mandate, well ahead of the year 2025, and they're on track for 50% by 2030. So they're definitely integrating high levels of renewable energy into their portfolio. But from an electrical engineer's perspective, I think one of the main challenges is this two-way power flow. So when you have distributed energy resources, the system was designed for one-way power flow from generation to transmission to distribution to your house. Well, now we've got two-way flow, and that brings with it some challenges for power quality and reliability and system performance that need to be managed. I think another big one that you guys have talked about is rate fairness. And when you look at this, it's both what you charge and what you pay for these distributed energy resources, because if you pay too much, what you end up having is people that can't afford to implement these technologies that pay for those that can, and we don't want to see that happen either. And then I know one of the questions I heard just as we were walking in is one of our major challenges as well. I think that the generation production doesn't occur when the demand is high. So wind is produced in the evening on cold nights, and that's not when peak energy demand is. So that leads to storage. And then one big question with storage is, what is it? Is storage generation or is it storage? And how is it priced accordingly? Because that does have a financial impact on what you dictate storage is. Another, I think, big challenge is and it's kind of an opportunity challenge, and I think one of the questions is opportunities. I'll talk about it again some more, but if we can have integrated control of these distributed energy resources, your wind and solar production, as a utility, we can actually manage those resources, and I think that's both something that we need to do to maintain effective power quality on the grid, and it's something that gives us more opportunity and flexibility if we can do that.
And Derek, would you just quickly define distributed resource?
Sure. Distributed energy resources are before it was called distributed generation, but now that you've brought storage into the mix, they made a new term called distributed energy resources, which is your solar, wind, any biothermal, any of these renewable portfolios that we've been talking about.
Thanks. All right, our third question. How do utilities make decisions about energy sources, and what factors go into those decisions?
Okay, I guess I'll start. So I mentioned that our generation and transmission provider is Great River Energy, and I talked about their portfolio. The one interesting thing is how they're governed. They're governed as a cooperative as well. So our board of directors sits on there's some of our board of directors that sit on their board of directors. So our members can actually come to our board meetings, participate in our local governance, and then that message can be carried through to Great River Energy's board of directors and their meetings and their governance. So I think that's a very effective way that local members can have an influence in how some of these policies and procedures unfold. We are going to be conducting some surveys this year, and Tammy's on, our public relations coordinators here. So if anybody would like to talk to her after the meeting and be a part of the discussions we're going to have later this year, but we're going to have some focus meetings with our members and some surveys just to see how many people are interested in distributed energy resources, hybrid electric vehicles, and such. And we'd like to provide more programs to that effect based on what the members dictate.
Thank you, Derek. I said it earlier, but really what goes into our decision-making process even before we get down to the sources is just values. And Elite Minnesota Power, we really think values do matter in making all those big decisions, and we are firmly committed to environmental stewardship over the long run, and that's kind of how we get up in the morning and go about our daily business. We realize that climate change is happening, and there's many factors involved, and it's complex. But we do know that humans have had a role in that, and it's our job to make sure we're stewards of that on into the future, and we take that challenge and responsibility seriously. When it gets boiled down to how do we do about it at the utility level, Minnesota Power is regulated by the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission, like I said earlier. We're required to file with the commission every 3 years an integrated resource plan, which is our generation strategy for the company. And there's many factors that get included in that strategy decision. There's societal factors, social factors, cost factors, as well as policy and different goals that the state of Minnesota has at that time. A lot of data gets put in there about costs and about customer load growth, and it gets put into a big economic model, and the computers run for days and days and days. And what gets spit out is this optimal path to meet all these requirements and with the lowest cost. So my old math geek part gets excited when I start talking about some of those models, but just understand it's kind of neat how the computers try to choose the best thing. But at the end of the day, it's a human decision. How do you justify making decisions of how much do you invest in a natural gas plant or a solar panel? And what we value about the regulated process that we're in is the requirements to be very open and transparent about those decision process, and also take in a lot of feedback and stakeholder input. So the drawback is it takes a long time. So it's filed, needs to be filed every 3 years, but sometimes it takes 3 years to complete the last one. So you could be filing your next one by the time you've completed all the stakeholder involvement. But what's key is we keep the local involvement there. And as you see with any major decision, we try to get as much of that as we can.
All right. So for Grand Rapids Public Utilities, and being a public power entity, we have a 5-member commission, which they are appointed by the mayor, and they oversee the decisions and the policies that we are looking at and moving forward. And one of the things that we're looking at is this forum right here in of itself. We've got 2 commissioners here and our mayor, and education, I think, has come up countless times here this morning about really working to educate and hear from our customers, what are we looking at? And so continuing to do more and more as far as outreach and involvement. What is important? Is it load management? Is it solar? Is it affordability only? Is it reliability? What is it that we at the public utilities can do in terms of meeting with the customers to look at what should those energy sources be. We've also got 2 members here of the Itasca Clean Energy Team. We've been working with them for 2 years on a community solar endeavor. And so really a good partnership, I would say, between the community and the local public utilities only can be improved by more interaction, I think, and more events such as this where we get together and talk about it. Again, in the community, for the community, I can't say it enough about public power, and the more that we can get the people out and talking about it and understanding it, I think the better decisions. It's very difficult to have 5 members of a commission sitting in a room and not a lot of attendance, and so the more that we can hear from the community, I think the better that those decisions are when we look at energy sources.
All right, thank you. A couple more questions before we get into all of your questions. How are utilities adapting to changes in the energy system?
Slowly, I think would be the start of the answer. We are at Public Utilities just about done with an automated metering infrastructure. So a very big change to a very small utility, but it is changing the way in which we do business. We are also looking, as I mentioned before, at newer innovative technologies, whether it's community solar or load management or water heater type storage scenarios, always looking for what those trends are. I think we talked a little bit before about the more common those items become in the bigger entities and bigger utilities, the easier it is for some of the smaller utilities to get on board and take advantage and realize those benefits. And so I think the answer is often slowly, but understanding what is going on in some of those bigger utilities certainly is guiding us as we move forward. I guess the one last thing would be DG, or distributed generation. We talked a little bit this morning, and when Stacy talked too about Public Utilities has 9 individual or rooftop solar or standalone solar, fixed solar in our entity, and really working on the stability of our system. And as we look at community solar, very important as well in what does that mean to the rest of our grid, and what does that mean to the rest of our system? And so a big engineering effort that goes into that as we look at these other opportunities, what does that mean to the existing reliability of our current system?
Yeah, thank you, Julie. I guess I would like to just piggyback on the slowly aspect. You know, we have to really appreciate the amount of change that has gone on too. I mean, the whole industry for the first 100 years of electricity, and you know, it's been very much steam driven, at least since the 1920s. So the amount and the rate at which we are changing away from more traditional forms is pretty fast, and it's not fast enough for some. But on the fundamental on the distribution side, now this gets interesting, where poles and wires really haven't changed since the early 1900s either, and now they are, and we have what's called smart grids and smart meters and smart wires and all these things that are taking advantage of technology. The challenge there is just cost, and also those original tried and true values of reliability, affordability, and safety. And as we integrate more renewables, and I think we've heard about the variability of renewable energy on the grid, and as Derek mentioned also, the two-way nature of power flows now, that some of it might be coming from my house rather than my house just taking power, are presenting new challenges. But with those challenges are opportunities, they say, and computer models help, data helps, more technology helps, but also good solid people to help make decisions and analyze things is helpful as well. So, you know, we talked about, those of us on the generation side, GRE and us, how much we've added renewable basis. I think that's just worth calling about how we're adapting to the actual generating sources. But what's getting even more exciting is what's going to happen on the distribution side when you know, data from your smart meter is more informative and to get to your cell phone so you can make a decision whether or not to turn your house temperature down to, you know, 50 degrees at night or something like that. That kind of real-time interaction with your energy consumption is what's coming. It's just going to take a while to get there. So we have to respect the history and the slowness to get here. There's a lot of change going on still, and we should recognize that that is going on. So, go ahead.
Thanks, Luke. Lake Country Power serves, just in case you didn't know, we serve about 11,000 square miles, a good chunk of northern Minnesota. We have about 50,000 members, and out of those 50,000 members, about 70 have solar or wind installations at this time. So it's not a huge number, but we have quite a few people taking advantage of it. We tried to poise ourselves back in 2012 to be prepared to take on the challenges of higher penetrations of renewables. So what we did is we had about 30 member meetings. We went through the entire area talking to members, getting feedback on how to structure our rates so that we could basically be financially neutral to the impact of that. And when it shook out, we changed our facility charge, which is our fixed charge, to be really a true representation of what the actual cost of service is. So it includes the cost of a transformer, clearing trees, the basic, the meter loop, and just the cost of just that basic service on a monthly basis. And that actually lowered our energy rate. So our energy rate went down, but it makes us in a good financial position where if we integrate renewables, there's no cost sharing, there's no cross subsidization among rate classes. So everybody pays their fair share. So financially, we're in a good position to take on higher penetrations of renewables. Technically wise, like you were talking about the wires, we have a lot of old infrastructure, a lot of built in the 40s and 50s. So we're working real hard to replace that so that we're ready on a technical basis. But we're doing about 75 miles of overhead line replacement a year and about 20 miles of underground, adding a lot of electronic controls so that we can address this two-way power flow and deliver reliable service.
All right, 2 more questions. What are some of the opportunities you see for your utility?
Should I start?
Sure.
All right. Well, like I said earlier, a lot of the challenges create the opportunities somewhat out of necessity. And it's interesting to be alive at this time when these challenges are getting solved. But I guess one thing I'd say is when we talk about carbon reduction, if that's our goal, and politics change back and forth, but we're still going to end up probably over the next 30 years doing, focusing more and more policy on carbon reduction. The best bang for your buck is in big projects. And distributed resources are also really good, and that will happen. But if your goal is to carbon elimination and control, large projects are going to provide the best economies of scale. So in the utility industry, that's something that's pretty exciting because that's where we can really add value and scale to projects. But that change still takes time, and it needs to be done right to make sure that the cost is not overbearing and things like that. But when it comes down to the distribution side, the smart grid is also very interesting, where you're actually using your grid back to supply some of those power needs, and new resources are going to be required. And we've talked about storage and how that can get put out there to mitigate some of the peaks and valleys in the load curve. And as we see storage costs coming down with adoption, that's pretty exciting to look at. So we're always looking at that and finding new ways to solve those problems as we look forward to the future. And I just can't say how much the data really does help. From the amount of data we're now able to receive from the distribution grid is way more powerful than it's been done before. And our analytical and engineering capabilities are also developing with that. So we're able to adapt and respond more quickly to real time to changes in the the load at the time. So how that comes out in the future is we'll have more of a flexible and adaptable grid to respond to societal demands. So there.
Thank you, Luke. I think opportunities, I'd sum in 2 different things for us. One would be on the customer level. Our automation and our technology right now is really going to help with the education. If a resident is able to, so we're implementing the automated metering, of which we're capturing regular readings of what that energy usage is on an hourly basis, if you will. Whereas before, it may have been just monthly with a meter reader that's going out there. And so what we'd like to do is use that for educational purposes. And so that as we looked at peaks, we talked this morning about peak shaving and different things like that, and load control and load factors. As customers, businesses, industries become more educated as to what their usage looks like, we feel that that will help with their ability to control or manage their own usage. And so really investing in that technology and looking to be able to educate our customers on doing something like that. Additionally, from a communication standpoint, we are exploring the outage management that I believe both of you have, that we are getting to, where when you have an outage, when we have an outage, we have a call center of which people can call in and find out that there's an outage, but we don't push that information out yet. And we are exploring that and hoping to have that very soon. And again, that we talked this morning, that gets to that communication. It's one thing to have some reliability issues where there's an outage, but to not be able to communicate that quickly and effectively to customers sometimes feels like the barrier. And so I think the better that we can communicate that to our customers, the better off we are. And I think that's a real big opportunity for us here coming up to take advantage of some technology to be able to do that. I think the other one, again, we don't generate, and so we are at the hand of whoever is providing us power. Currently, Minnesota Power is doing that. But as technologies change, as different distributed generation is available, and Zach, I think, talked about MISO a little bit, it's really becoming a global market. Those days of strictly going from IOU to distributor to customer is changing, and the way that we all do business is changing. And so I think that certainly will change and is an opportunity for us at the local level, being distribution only, to be able to access some of those competitive costs. Again, we talked 70% of our costs roughly go to what we have to pay for the power itself. And so if we can maximize that, there's a huge change in what our rates will be. And so the better off we are in the cost of that power, the better off we are in providing that savings in those rates to our customers. So I think that's a big opportunity for us in the coming years.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, I'd echo that same. We're a distribution-only provider as well, and the same portion of our costs are tied up that way. But I think another opportunity, of course, you guys have talked about is the distributed energy resources, solar and wind, are coming down in price. They're more affordable to more people, and so they're going to be deployed more. That's exciting to see, and it should have an impact on cost of generation to keep cost of generation low, and hopefully power costs low for the foreseeable future. I know Great River Energy just bought into an extended wind contract with long-term pricing that's very attractive, much cheaper than coal. So seeing those take place now gives you a lot of hope for lower energy prices in the future. I talked a little bit earlier about having joint control of the distributed energy resources between utility and member. And I'm sure a lot of you remember the storms we had in 2012, 2016. They were pretty massive storms and a lot of people out of power for extended periods of time. Well, if we could have control of those systems, we could have isolated microgrids that would provide service to more people during those large outages, and we could still assure adequate power quality. So I think that's a pretty big opportunity, is we could have, reduce the impact of major outages by having joint control of some of those distributed resources. And I think it's also exciting to be members and consumers in this time, because you get a choice now in who your generation is, and therefore what your long-term costs of power are going forward.
All right, and then finally, our last question before we get into all of your questions. What are some actions that could be taken to address the challenges that you talked about, or maximize the opportunities that have been identified? And you can think about that at individual level, community level, or potentially policy state level as well.
Sure.
Some of the actions that could be taken or that we are taking, certainly education. I don't think I can say it enough. I had written down earlier here, educate ourselves, get involved, and that means consumers and users and customers and utility staff and policymakers and boards and governing bodies get involved and see what those opportunities are out there for us. Roundtable discussions such as this, I know it takes time and out of our lives, but I think it's very important, and I think that's somebody had mentioned the culture change that is needed in order to see a difference, and so we're certainly doing that. We have conversations on a regional level with other utilities, and what are they doing, and how can we group together to either look at a combined distributed energy system or a combined wholesale market or whatever we can do so that we're making sure that we're talking to each other from a utility to utility basis. And so I think, again, it's communication. I think the words came out before: communication, collaboration, education. The more we know, I think the better decisions that we have to make in front of us.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. I'd like to just reiterate a lot of those same things that Julie's talked about, that education first and foremost, like what is going on today. That collaboration is really key. And what's really important is that we solve these big societal problems and opportunities of technology change is that we all work together on that. Those traditional barriers that separate consumer and producer are being eroded, and it's always important to have that partnership and that collaboration, because jointly together is how we'll be able to solve that. So as responsible citizens and leaders in Itasca County, I assume I'm with the best and the brightest and the people that represent the future of electric consumption in the area and potentially generation as well. So it's important that we all kind of realize we're in this together and work together to solve the best situations. It's when people get kind of looking at preserving their interests that things always tends to break down, rather than having a collaborative environment to do that in. So I applaud you for being here and keeping up the good work on responsibility and creating the future that we'll all hope to enjoy for many years to come.
Thanks, Luke. Just like the municipals, like Julie was talking about, have a great network to draw from. We too have a network like that with Great River Energy. It's owned by 28 member cooperatives, and we have meetings where we collaborate and talk about these issues and try to standardize and take a best practice approach to solving some of these problems. We also, I mentioned, have focus group meetings, and we will be having those meetings this summer to meet with our members to talk about these challenges and to get member input to decide how to address them. And today, any of our members can buy anywhere from 1 to 100% of their power from either solar or wind, and so those are some of the opportunities available. I think that there's some great websites out there, like TED.com or Idea, where there's a lot of information sharing and idea exchange. You can, just like you're doing here, the local presence I think is very important so that you can have that face-to-face, because and actually maybe talk about some of the technologies and evaluate them maybe even firsthand. And I think participating, though, in your utilities governance is really important. So to the extent that you're able, if you can go to board meetings, annual meetings, member meetings, so that you can have a say in how policies unfold.
Often a distribution-only company negotiates rates.
So I've been with public utilities for 1.5 years, and when I was going through my succession planning, one of the key things was we just got done negotiating rates, and we won't have to do it until 2024, and we didn't make 1.5 years. And so sometimes more often than I really wanted to, but on average, right now we are out to about 2024, 2029 is what we're looking at, so long term for us. And you're even longer.
Yeah, we buy our contract with Great River Energy is I think through 2045. So we buy long-term power contracts. Now it was competitively bid in 2008, so we took a look at everybody that was on the market, and they were the low-cost provider. But we look at internally at our own rate structure. Every 3 years we do a cost of service study, and based on the results of that cost of service study, we look at what our rate structure is. And really the goal of that is to make sure that everybody's paying their fair share and that no one rate class is subsidizing another rate class.
Mm-hmm. And if I could just speak on behalf of all those generators out there on the other side of the distribution utilities, is that the assets that we're building are long-lived assets. So a solar panel is a 30-year asset. A coal plant is 30 years of. So when you have long-term assets, it's pretty much required that you have long-term load to guarantee that. So that's kind of the background behind the length. It's not like you're in the market every day, like watching your your shares of E-Trade or whatever it is, that fluctuates daily. But we're talking about asset-driven and cost of service-based pricing.
That was good. Thank you.
Or does it have an escalator built into it? So our rate, basically, there's a pretty much a fixed. It's called capacity or demand, which is the let's call it fixed costs of the system, and then that's pretty much fixed. But then there's a variable component based on energy, which is fuel. And ironically, wind power shows up as a negative fuel cost So if Julie, I'm sorry I didn't create the bill, but it's not exactly very intuitive when you see it, but there's fixed costs, which are basically all the poles, the wires on the transmission line, and then the generators out there. That's part of that demand or capacity rate. And then there's the energy rate, which fluctuates based on actual usage, where we would get potentially negative fuel costs from a wind resource, potentially, or gas in a gas turbine, or coal in the coal pile in the coal house.
And there's an ability on that fixed charge, up at a certain percent and down at a certain percent. And there's a window there, if you will.
Yep. And the old utility model is cost of service based, which is if you have this much cost and this many megawatts to divide it over, you just do the big divide, and that's what it is. And what we minimizing that variability is really important. So that's why we have these. Kind of is that how it is for GRE too? I can't speak on behalf of GRE. Okay.
So this kind of is, with the smart technology and infrastructure reliability, but maybe it's off the path a little bit, but what are you doing about cyber attacks? How is that affecting you, and are you dealing with it? Is it something it's an everyday thing now, and we got the tech guys in there, but I'm just curious. Did you hear a lot about it lately? So.
Yeah, I think it's something that's going to be we're going to be hearing more and more about. As we talk about like hacking, as becoming even more of a daily occurrence on healthcare companies and things that you wouldn't normally expect. And just a couple years ago, there as part of the whole situation in the Middle East, there were actually hacking of power plants was a big deal, and whether or not the CIA was responsible for part of it or not, it doesn't matter. But there were active attempts to ruin and destroy power turbines in Iran that were working on nuclear energy, and that virus is still around potentially. So in response to that, the NERC, which is the National Energy Regulatory Commission, governs. Is at the highest level of the federal government some of those security requirements. All transmission networks, which are the big power lines that connect region to region, all of those have very high NERC alert standards that were resulting from some of the Stuxnet virus that happened in 2012. But since then, even more and more of our distribution network is being monitored closely. All of our substations have cameras as well as remote security, so we can see what's going on in there. And there's very strict requirements. If you ever were to visit our control center up on the hill outside of Duluth, it's like going to Fort Knox with like a big gated access with barbed wires and all these things. But it's just to keep the grid reliable, because that's one way to cause damage quickly, is if the grid is not. So we take our responsibility on cybersecurity very seriously.
Go ahead, Derek.
Oh, I was just going to say that covers, like the NERC covers 115 kV and above, so the transmission infrastructure. But at the distribution level, I don't know if you're familiar with like the Ukraine incident where they basically got access to, they fished access to into their network, and then they also got into their SCADA network. Once they got into their network, then they fished access into their SCADA network, and then they actually brought the system down by overheating all the equipment in their SCADA infrastructure. So they had to go back to hands-on, back out in the field with paper. What we've done to try to eliminate that risk is we have two-party authentication. So you could phish my password maybe, but I also have to have another key or token that encrypt in a digital token. So it wouldn't be, you'd have to have that digital token with you. So we have things in place that can prevent like the Ukraine incident, but there definitely is there's always a cybersecurity risk, because as you increase your level of protection, they increase their ability, and so it's a step-by-step process. So I think the best way we can mitigate that risk going forward is to have these group participations where we talk about the risks and we across the board implement, because you're only as strong as your weakest link. So any of your weakest partners out there that aren't incorporating any of the technologies, they become the weak link in the chain and could take the system down still.
You guys try to keep at the same rate and try to stay close to, so it's not like a competition, somebody's more than the other. Can you explain why both bills one is higher for one company and one is lower for another company? Is there other hidden costs?
We serve an average of 5.7 members per mile of infrastructure. What's your number, 35, I think?
It's quite a bit different.
So when you look, so if you look at the number of members that they have to balance their facilities across, it's much larger than ours, because cooperatives were formed because there was a need for power, but it was not cost effective to bring power to the rural areas. So what happened is people got together and said, well, we want electricity, so we'll do it ourselves. And that's really how cooperatives were formed under the old REA. And so they got together and they built their own line, and that's why it's a not-for-profit, and that business model is basically was to bring power out where it wasn't cost effective. So it's a tougher model to try to, and that's why our costs are higher. Our fixed costs is quite a bit higher because we only have 5.7 members per mile of infrastructure to spread them across.
Can I just add something?
Very, very quick.
Okay, you know, the distribution per customer makes sense. That's very explainable. Are there other factors that, besides the fact that public utilities has got a lot of customers per mile and you've got very few customers per mile? Are there other major factors?
That really is the major factor, because the cost of building line is very, I mean, we all hire the same contractors, so we've all paid the same material costs. Generation costs are very competitive, and we pay about the same percentage in terms of what portion of our costs are on generation. So it pretty much is that.